Liz couldn't believe her eyes. There, sitting on a rickety folding table at a yard sale in St. James, Long Island, was the very same antique clock she had tossed to the curb 3 years earlier during a downsizing frenzy. The stately oak-framed regulator clock, with its octagonal face and brass pendulum, had once occupied a place of prominence in the hallway of her old Northport home. More than just a timepiece, it held sentimental value, a gift that had allegedly once belonged to John Denver before making its way into Liz's hands. "Ron, look!" Liz grabbed her husband's arm, pulling him towards the makeshift display. "It's my clock, the one I got rid of when we moved. I can't believe it ended up here." Ron peered at it skeptically. "Are you sure it's the same one? These replica railroad clocks are a dime a dozen." Liz ran her fingers over the smooth oak, turning it gently to examine the back. There, as if winking knowingly at her, was the distinct pink scar left behind when the clock's built-in music box had violently dislodged itself, shooting across the hallway and disappearing into a heating duct. "It's the same clock, I'm positive," Liz declared, an odd mixture of excitement and unease swirling in her gut. The owner of the yard sale, a wiry man in his 50s named Sam, sauntered over. "See something you like?" he asked with a salesman's grin. "This clock," Liz began. "Where did you get it?"
Sam shrugged.
"Oh, that old thing? Found it sitting on a curb a few towns over. I'm something of a picker, you see. I scoop up trash and turn it into treasure. Just needed a little TLC to get her running like a dream again." Liz exchanged a knowing glance with Ron. So this was their clock's journey. From beloved heirloom to abandoned curbside rubbish to restored beauty awaiting a new home. There was something poetic about it, Liz thought, and perhaps something a bit unsettling as well. "Well, how much are you asking for it?" Ron queried, ever the pragmatist. $50 and she's yours," Sam replied breezily. "A steal for a beaut like that." Ron balked. "50? For our own clock," he muttered under his breath. But Liz was already reaching for her purse. She couldn't quite explain it, but she felt an intense pull, a need to bring the clock home again. It was almost as if it was calling out to her, demanding to be rescued. "We'll take it," Liz said decisively, handing Sam a crisp $50 bill. The yard sale proprietor eagerly accepted the cash, his eyes darting about nervously as he hurried to wrap the clock in a soft, moving blanket. "Mighty kind of you folks to give her a good home," Sam mumbled distractedly, all but thrusting the swaddled timepiece into Liz's arms. "You take good care of her now, why here?" Liz cradled the clock against her chest, a sudden heaviness in the air making it a bit harder to breathe. She chalked it up to the thick humidity of the late summer morning. "Let's go home," she said to Ron, who wordlessly followed her to the car, still shaking his head in mild disbelief at the odd turn the morning had taken. The clock took up residence once again in the hallway of Liz and Ron's home. Secured to the wall by sturdy hooks, Ron made triply sure of that. It ticked away the minutes and hours dependably, its gentle rhythm a soothing background to daily life. Liz would often pause on her way from room to room, gazing at the clock's face as if trying to divine some hidden secret in the delicate filigrees of the antique hands. Sometimes, she could swear the soft ticking almost sounded like a whisper, words just beyond the edge of comprehension. "I swear that clock is haunted," Liz remarked one evening as she and Ron relaxed in the living room after dinner. "Sometimes I get the oddest feeling around it, like it's watching me." Ron snorted, not taking his eyes off the hockey game playing on the television. "It's just an old clock, Liz. A haunted clock." "Really?" As if on cue, the Westminster chimes melody began to play, heralding the arrival of the 10 o'clock hour. Ron and Liz both sat up a bit straighter, eyeing each other uneasily. "I thought that tune played only at midnight," Ron said slowly. "Did you change the settings?" Liz shook her head, a small shiver running down her spine. "No, I haven't touched it." The chiming stopped as abruptly as it started, leaving the house blanketed in an eerie silence. Liz and Ron sat motionless for a long moment, the only sound the low drone of the sportscasters on the TV. "I'm sure there's a logical explanation," Ron said finally, though his tone was far from certain. Probably just a short in the wiring or something. Liz nodded numbly, wanting desperately to believe him. But deep down, a small, insistent voice told her that this was only the beginning of the clock's strange stirrings. The aberrant chiming became a nightly occurrence. No matter how many times Ron tinkered with the clock's inner mechanisms or replaced its batteries, the Westminster melody continued to play at odd intervals, often waking Liz and Ron from a sound sleep. Bleary-eyed and irritable, they would stumble into the hallway, squinting against the clock's pale face in the darkness. But the hands always showed the correct time, even as the chimes echoed at 3 in the morning or 5:30 in the evening. "This is ridiculous," Ron grumbled after a particularly jarring 2 a.m. wake-up call. "That thing is going in the garage. I don't care if it's sentimental. I need my damned sleep." But Liz protested, feeling strangely protective of the clock. "You can't shove it in the garage," she argued. "It's an antique. The heat and cold could damage it." Ron threw up his hands in exasperation. "Fine, then I'm calling a clock repair specialist. This ends now." The repairman arrived the following Tuesday, a stooped older gentleman with wisps of white hair and thick-lensed glasses. He introduced himself as Edgar and spent nearly an hour examining the clock, his wrinkled hands carefully manipulating the delicate gears. "I must say," he said finally, stepping back with a puzzled frown, "I've never seen anything quite like this. The mechanics are sound. There's no reason for the irregular chiming. It's almost as though... Well, never mind. Almost as though what?" Liz prodded, leaning forward eagerly. Edgar hesitated, looking suddenly uncomfortable. "Well, I know it sounds crazy, but it's almost as though the clock has a mind of its own." Ron let out a sharp bark of laughter. "Oh, come on. It's a clock, not a sentient being." But Liz felt a small thrill of validation at the repairman's words. So she wasn't imagining things. There was something unusual about this timepiece, something possibly beyond the realm of rational explanation. The weeks ticked by, and the clock's odd behavior only escalated. The chiming became more frequent, sometimes happening multiple times an hour. And then new phenomena began to occur. Liz would find the clock in slightly different positions when she'd walk by, almost as if the heavy oak frame was shifting itself when no one was looking. Knick-knacks on the hall table would be rearranged, stacked into precarious towers one day and arranged into intricate spirals the next. And then there were the whispers. First, Liz thought she was hearing things. She would be folding laundry or reading in the living room, and a faint murmur would reach her ears, like muffled words spoken from the other end of a long tunnel. But whenever she'd go to investigate, the hallway would be empty, the clock ticking away innocently. Until one night, as Liz was coming out of the bathroom, she heard it as clear as day. A raspy voice, ancient and dry as crumbling leaves. Liz's. She froze, her heart slamming against her ribcage. The clock seemed to loom before her, suddenly ominous, the brass pendulum swinging like a hypnotist's watch. "Who's there?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "Liz, I've been waiting so long," the eerie voice rattled. "Waiting for you to hear me." Liz clapped her hands over her mouth to muffle the scream building in her throat. Her mind reeled as she tried to process what she was hearing. The clock, her clock, it was speaking to her. "What do you want?" she managed finally, her knees trembling beneath her. "Want? I want to be free," the voice creaked. "Free from the prison of wood and glass and metal. I've been trapped for so long, Liz, so very long. But you can save me. You have the power to release me." Liz shook her head vehemently, hysteria bubbling up. "No. No, this isn't real. You're not real. Leave me alone." She bolted then, fleeing to the bedroom and slamming the door as if she could shut out the voice, the clock, the rising tide of terror threatening to engulf her. But even as she buried herself beneath the covers, the taunting whisper followed her into her fitful dreams. Liz's. In the light of day, Liz tried to convince herself it had all been a nightmare. Clocks didn't talk. Spirits didn't inhabit antique timepieces. The whole idea was ludicrous, but the memory of that grating voice, the undeniable reality of it, continued to haunt her. and the clock's antics grew bolder, more insistent. The hands would spin backwards, then forwards, then stop completely at random. The chimes began to play snatches of melodies that had no business coming from a classic clock rock riffs, snippets of show tunes, and most disturbingly, mournful dirges that sent icy fingers down Liz's spine. Ron, for his part, was at his wits' end. He'd always been the skeptic, the voice of reason, but even he couldn't deny that something was very wrong with their clock. "I think we need to get rid of it," he said one evening, his jaw set in determination. "Toss it, sell it, I don't care. It's affecting you too much. You're not sleeping, you're jumping at every little noise. It's not healthy." Part of Liz knew he was right. Whatever was happening with the clock, it was taking a toll on her mental state. But another part of her, a deeper, more primal part, felt an inexplicable connection to the mysterious timepiece, as if getting rid of it would be akin to abandoning a part of herself. I don't know if I can," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "I know it sounds crazy, but I feel like it needs me, like I'm meant to help it somehow." Ron's face crumpled in pained sympathy. He reached out to gather her in his arms. "Honey, it's a clock, an object. It doesn't need anything. Please, let's just get it out of the house. I'm worried about you." Liz clung to him, wanting to give in, to let him take this burden from her. But even as she nodded against his chest, she knew in her heart she couldn't let the clock go. Not until she understood what it wanted from her. The voice came to Liz again that night as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Ron was snoring softly beside her, but she was wide awake, her mind spinning like the hands of the clock. "Liz!" It beckoned from the hallway. "Come to me." As if in a trance, Liz slid out from beneath the covers, her bare feet moving soundlessly across the carpeted floor. She padded down the hall, the clock's pale face glowing in the darkness like a beacon. "I'm here," she whispered, reaching out to touch the smooth glass. It was warm beneath her fingertips, almost feverishly so. "Tell me what you want from me." "I want to be free," the voice said again, longing and desperation straining through the creaky syllables. "I've been trapped for so long, moved from place to place, never able to rest. I need your help, Liz. Only you can release me." "How?" Liz breathed. "How do I set you free?" There was a long pause, the clocks ticking strangely loud in the heavy silence. "You must break me," the voice said finally, so softly Liz had to strain to hear it. "Shatter the glass, splinter the wood. Only then can my spirit be released from this cage." Liz recoiled, shaking her head. "Break you? But you're an antique, a beautiful clock. I can't destroy you." The voice took on a pleading, wheedling tone. "Please, Liz, it's the only way. I'm so tired, so weary of this existence. You're my only hope. Please, set me free." Liz's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her heart a wild bird fluttering in her chest. Could she do it? Could she bring herself to smash this clock that had meant so much to her, even with its disturbing abilities? She imagined the splintering wood, the shards of glass tinkling to the floor, the abrupt, permanent absence of that ticking that had become the metronome of her days. It made her feel physically ill. I don't know," she wavered. "Please." The voice rose in volume, taking on a sudden, terrifying edge. The clock began to shake on the wall, the pendulum swinging in wild arcs. "Do it!" Liz stumbled back with a choked cry, her nerve failing her. She couldn't. Even if she wanted to, she didn't have the strength. She fled back to her bedroom, ducking beneath the covers and burying her face in her pillow as if she could block out the clock's enraged howling.
"I'm sorry.
She whimpered over and over.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry."
Eventually, the clock fell silent, but Liz didn't sleep a wink. She lay awake until the first dove-gray light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, her mind churning with anxiety and guilt. Liz went through the motions of her day like a zombie, pouring coffee she forgot to drink, listlessly pushing food around her plate. She jumped at sudden noises, her eyes flicking constantly to the hallway. half expecting the clock to come careening off the wall in a furious tantrum. But it remained still, silent. Only the metrical tick-tocking gave any indication it was working at all. It was almost more unnerving than the previous antics. By dinner time, Liz was a wreck. Her hands shook as she set the table, silverware chattering against the plates. Ron watched her with open concern, his brow furrowed. "Honey, this has to stop," he said gently. "You can't go on like this. That clock, it has some kind of hold on you. It's not healthy. We need to get rid of it. Today." Liz's head snapped up, panic rising like bile in her throat.
No.
"No, you can't. It needs me. Listen to yourself." Ron's voice rose in frustration and worry. "It's a clock, Liz. An inanimate object. It doesn't need anything." "You don't understand," Liz cried. "It's trapped. It's suffering. Enough." Ron slammed his palm down on the table, making the glasses rattle. "I can't watch you unravel like this. I'm getting rid of it tonight, and that's final." He pushed back from the table, his chair screeching against the wood floor. Liz flew after him, catching at his arm as he strode deliberately toward the clock.
No.
"Ron, please, you can't. You don't know what will happen. She grabbed the back of his shirt, her feet slipping on the rug as she tried to haul him back. But Ron was a big man, and his momentum carried them both forward until he was reaching for the clock, his fingers closing around the wooden frame. The clock seemed to shudder under his touch, the pendulum giving one last forlorn swing. Liz pounded on Ron's back, screaming at him to stop, but he heaved the clock off the wall with a determined grunt. For a single, breathless moment, the world seemed to stop. The clock hung suspended in Ron's hands, Liz's fingers still twisted desperately in his shirt. Then, with a sickening crack, Ron brought the clock down hard over his knee. The wood splintered with a shriek, shards of glass spraying out in a glittering arc. The hands and spindles and coiled springs went flying, delicate metal crumpling like confetti. Liz screamed, a high, keening wail that barely sounded human. She fell to her knees beside the shattered remains of the clock, her hands hovering helplessly over the ruined pieces. "What have you done?" she moaned, tears coursing down her face. "What have you done?" Ron stood over her, his chest heaving, a wild look in his eyes. "I did what I had to do," he said hoarsely. "For you, for us. That thing was poisoning you, poisoning our lives." Liz wasn't listening. She was rocking back and forth, gathering the shards of glass and splinters of wood in her bleeding hands as if she could somehow piece the clock back together again. "I'm sorry," she whispered brokenly. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't help you." Ron knelt beside her, trying to still her frantic movements. "Liz, honey, stop. You're hurting yourself. It's over. It's just a broken clock." But even as he said it, a sudden gust of icy wind swept through the hallway, ruffling their hair and prickling their skin with goosebumps. A low moan filled the air, raising in pitch until it was a piercing shriek of rage and anguish. Ron and Liz clung to each other, eyes wide with terror as tendrils of mist began to seep from the shattered remnants of the clock. They swirled and coalesced into a vaguely human shape, looming over them in the flickering light. "You fools!" the specter howled, its voice like shattering glass. "You've ruined everything." It lunged at them, ethereal hands outstretched like claws. Liz and Ron screamed, scrabbling backwards across the floor in a desperate bid to escape. The spirit was on them in a heartbeat, icy tendrils wrapping around their throats, freezing the breath in their lungs. "I only wanted to be free," it wailed as they choked and gasped. "But now I am trapped forever between realms, never to find my rest. And it's all because of you." Liz tried to cry out, to apologize, to beg for release, but the specter's grip was relentless. She felt the world going dim around the edges, her body growing heavy and numb as she suffocated beneath the vengeful ghost's touch. In the distance, through the roaring in her ears, she could hear Ron gasping her name, could feel his hand groping blindly for hers. Their fingers met, intertwined, a final connection as the darkness closed in. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The wind died, the shrieking ceased. The misty form of the clock's spirit dissipated like vapor in the sun. Liz and Ron collapsed on the floor as the pressure released from their throats, coughing and crying as they gulped in precious lungfuls of air. For a long, shaky moment, they simply held each other, trembling in shock and residual terror. The hall was silent now, save for the soft ticking of the small modern clock on the table. Is it over? Liz managed finally, her voice a croak. Ron glanced around warily, taking in the splintered remains of the clock laying in a sad heap on the carpet. I think so, he said slowly. I think it's gone. They slept in the living room that night, huddled together on the couch with every light in the house blazing. Neither of them ever wanted to see the inside of the hallway again. The next day, they talked about moving, finding a new house, in a new town, far, far away from the memory of that fateful clock and its vengeful specter. But in the end they stayed, refusing to let fear chase them from their home. They swept up the pieces of the clock, wrapping them reverentially in soft cloth and burying them in the backyard beneath the oak tree. Maybe it can finally rest now, Liz murmured as they patted the dirt back into place. Maybe we all can. And for a while it seemed they could. Until the day, months later, while browsing a flea market 3 towns over, Liz's eye caught on a familiar shape. There, nestled among the dusty baubles and second-hand knickknacks, was an antique regulator clock, oak-framed, with an octagonal face and a gleaming brass pendulum. As if sensing her gaze, the hands gave a little shimmy, and a familiar tune began to play. Westminster chimes. Liz turned and walked quickly away.